No Box Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production, and social media. Don't forget, say no to the box. Dile no a la caja. 고정관념이란 상자에서 벗어나세요.
Welcome back to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. This is your host, Martheya. In season 6, our theme is dance and technology. Our goal this season is to talk about how dance can coexist in a world of screens, social media, and interactive and immersive environments. Our guest today, Dr. Adesola Akinleye, is an interdisciplinary artist scholar and choreographer. They have created works ranging from live performance that is often site-specific and involves a cross-section of the community to films, installations, and texts. Dr. Akinleye founded and is co-artistic director of DancingStrong Movement Lab. With that, welcome to our show, Dr. Akinleye.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Your work is characterized as, and I quote, voicing people's lived experiences in places through creative moving portraiture. Can you briefly introduce yourself and talk about your relationship with dance as an interdisciplinary artist, scholar, and choreographer?
Yeah, my name's Adesola Akinleye. I'm a dancer and a choreographer, and I see choreography as a sort of study of how things move together and in and around each other. So I'm really interested in the idea of, ends up being like spatial practices, like the way that we move around each other on stage, but also the way that we move around each other in cities, the way that thoughts move around each other and connect to each other as we talk to each other, the way that language moves around on paper and texts. I've found myself working a lot with architects and curators and urban designers because they also have an interest in how things are in relationship with each other in space. So in a way, I'm seeing my work as to do with spatial practices, and spatial practices umbrellas a number of different disciplines.
It's so interesting to hear how you describe the work that you do. It's so evident in your website, even how the mouse is like these different words that are floating around the page. Hearing you describe your work, I immediately visualized my experience on your website. So I love that correlation.
Yeah, I wanted to have the words dancing with you. It's a little kind of old school, like the way that it follows the mouse around, but it's nice that you end up having to think about even the way you're moving the mouse in order to get to the different things.
I want to hear a little bit more about your current project. Before the interview, you mentioned you're working with augmented reality. Could you tell us a little bit about this project and what drew you to AR?
Yeah, the project's a little bit of an offshoot from a paper that we might talk about later that is about looking at dance and technology that I did with a colleague. And now, as an offshoot for that, I'm looking at this, what I'm calling space plus dance plus digital. And that's using augmented reality. And it's coming from what I was just saying about working with architects and urban designers and so forth, looking at the ways that we live together and how I make a lot of site-specific dance. And so a really good story about that is being outside a building that had these really interesting big red circle blocks outside. And when we saw that, we were walking through the city, just doing different scores in different places. We saw that and we went and we're like, oh, we really want to dance with this. And the security person came and said, oh, you're not allowed to dance here because the very front of the building is private land, the way that a shopping mall is actually private land. So that was ironic because I felt sure that whoever designed that as an architect designed it for interaction, but the lived experience of it is it's protected because it's this little bit of private land. So thinking about how actually everywhere we're going our movement is being conducted by the different laws of these different private entities, like governmental, private things. There's not any much common land anymore. where we co-create space together. Like we are moving, but we're moving under the kind of laws of somebody else's ownership of that land. That's a big thing. And there's some interesting things around how the land corresponds to the way the land is controlled corresponds to the way the history of women being controlled. There's really interesting things around the Middle Ages and how the beginning of land being the beginning of the end of common land was also around certain women would be the people that kind of were the herbalists or looked after places like that, but didn't own those things. That's a little bit of an aside, but it's an interesting history. And then, of course, that was in Europe. And then in the Americas, the nations that were here before Europeans didn't feel that they owned the land. They felt like they were part of it, that you're co-creating, being a part of everything. Long story short, so what can art do for all of that, I'm thinking? And what it feels, if we don't get to practice how to be together in our everyday lives, we don't get to co-create the spaces we're in, then art can offer us things to practice. Like art experiences can offer us practicing in imagining ways to do things or be things or see things that aren't in the everyday. And that's one of the amazing things about art, is that it can stretch your imagination, bring you into a space where you couldn't have imagined it, because we want to be in that space. If you can imagine it, then it doesn't push you beyond your ideas. But if you're experiencing something you could never have imagined, then you're growing.
Create, discuss, and advocate for art. No box dance.
I wanted to do something where the movement itself became the space. So it didn't matter that you were in physical space that is regulated, but how could the choreography itself become the space that we meet in? Because when we dance together in the studio or in the street, we do start to create a kind of exchange of ideas. It's if you learn a dance with somebody and you see them going in the wrong direction or changing something, it becomes a way of understanding each other's movements. I'm often very quickly teaching people things like line dances or country dances where it's quite ordered and you know what's going to happen next, because as you're learning it, you start to be able to read each other and it starts to become a container for being in relationship with each other, because you can tell, Angie always goes that way and she's meant to go that way. And it starts to become a conversation of I'll go with what she's doing, even though it's wrong, or, she'll come back round and I'll let her in. So it starts to become a kind of conversation in movement. Could the choreography become a place in itself? Could it become the thing that was common between us? So I was wondering, could we take the choreography and make that the common space? With what I've been working on is movement capturing the trails or what's left when people do a piece of choreography, so that it becomes a visual thing that you can move in and out of, it becomes more architectural. And you can see that in the augmented reality, so that it's, regardless of what material physical space I'm in, the choreography is a part of that, because I can see it through the augmented reality. And I'm working with doing that and having someone else in another place that is another geographic location that is watching the choreography at the same time. So we both have the choreography in common, even though we're in different physical spaces, and that we can see each other's hands or head movements in the choreography, so that we can have that then as the choreography being like the commonality between us. So as we watch it or move along with it or respond to it and respond to each other, we start to co-create the whole of the choreography. So that would be my little solution to a kind of practicing co-creating together, to have dance as the common space that we can come together in despite our geographic locations. And that's what the augmented reality could offer.
That sounds like such an exciting project and a really interesting concept for utilizing AR. And I'm wondering, why did you think augmented reality was the right digital tool for this project?
Yeah. And just to say that I've been working with Talis Reeks, who is a colleague at the Immersion Lab at MIT. And I first started working there with him and the sort of beginning of trying to make this idea into a virtual reality, as it were, was part of a residency that I was doing there at MIT at ACT, Arts, Culture and Technology. I really like the idea of augmented reality because you can see where you are. And I'm really interested in how the embodied felt is still part of the digital world when we're dancing. So the thing about augmented reality is that you're aware of your body in the physical space that it's in because you can see the physical space that you're in. Whereas with virtual reality, there's more of a danger if we were trying to do this, that you started to lose the sense of the physicality of where you were. There's also a kind of practical thing in that you actually can't see what's around you. So you can't maneuver the space that you're in. And then there's also, I really like the idea that two people in different places, although they can't see the physical space that they're in, they can't see each other's physical bodies either. They can only see the result of movement, but how the result of movement, which might be me moving around a chair because it's in the way in my room, you see just as the result of that movement. And that for me starts to bring in the idea that the actual physical place that we're in is part of who we are. Because my movement is limited by the space that I'm in, as well as my choices of aesthetic that I'm doing with the movement. So it means that even though we're not in the same space, I can still feel there's some acknowledgement of the physical space that the other person's in because they can see it. And so that affects their movement.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
I want to go back a little bit. As you mentioned, you had your time as a research fellow at MIT, where lots of your work was around the notions of spatial practices. And I want to know why. What has drawn you to this type of work, and specifically taking these different spatial practices and then tying them to digital technologies?
I think there's something just naturally to me that interested in how things are ordered, how things relate to each other. Like I remember as a child playing with the chess set, but not playing chess with it, but making these sort of different patterns or choreographies of how the different pieces would move and in relationship to each other. But I am really interested in cities particularly, although I'm interested in gathering places of beings. Like I'm interested in rivers and forests and cities, but in terms of cities, they seem like an opportunity in the future for us to have less impact on the environment because there are opportunities for collaboration and shared resources that cities could offer. Currently, they almost offer the opposite, like they're like sprawling into things and where everyone individually has their own thing of the same thing, but they seem to be ways to offer collaboration and nests and other insects that kind of teach us about living together in a way that means that we support each other. So it goes back to that sort of co-created common spaces. So it's really interesting from a choreographic perspective to understand the city through how people move around it. And I just find that fascinating because a lot of cities, the streets they slowly change. They're on a very different time zone. They're slowly changing over years and hundreds of years, and their skylines are slowly moving. If we understood time from that perspective, there would be this ongoing rippling kind of movement that a city is. And then within that, we're moving again very fast through it. So I find that just really interesting.
I appreciate you sharing your sentiment too about when you were a child, how you're visualizing and choreographing the chess pieces. And I think it was in another podcast interview that you mentioned how you approach writing in the same way, choreographing the words on a page. And so it's really interesting to see how you are framing visual markers as a way of almost like dancers in a performance, always moving in and around each other.
Yeah, I'm dyslexic. The kind of dyslexia I've got, one of the things is that I absorb what's in the middle first. So in a sentence, I get the middle of the sentence and then the ends, the beginning and the ends, or in remembering a word or something. I actually don't remember the order of spelling, but I know the shape that my hand makes or that my fingers make on the keyboard. So I think I've just, from a child, when I was younger, dyslexia wasn't as recognized. And it took I was quite older when that's ended up what it was. So I think I've learned from a young age to look at the way things are shaped and the way they're moving around each other in order to be able to read and write.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of thing about writing being like choreography, that is very real to me, because whenever I write something, I know there's going to be some shuffling around that needs to happen, in order for it to make sense to other people.
It leads me to a question I want to ask you revolving around borders. In Dancing the Digital Age, a survey of new technologies in the choreographic process, the article reviews the impact of new technologies as an essential tool in the creative processes of dance and exploration of the moving body. And you write, and I quote, "Creativity seems to make perceived borders between art and science permeable or even arbitrary." And I'm wondering if you can talk about what you see our perceived borders are with dance and technology. And perhaps you can talk about also how you see these borders evolving as the new technologies are developed.
Yeah, and just to say that article was written with a colleague of mine who was the lead on writing that. It was part of some research that he'd done, and I was mentoring him with. So it wasn't just me,
And we'll link the article in the show notes with the full credits.
Okay, great. I feel like one of the perceived borders, I keep getting back to this kind of Middle Ages and Enlightenment kind of time when I was talking about common land as well, where the idea of science became shifted into being like interchangeable with the idea of truth. If it can be proved, then it's true, and that science proves things. But that was sort of a little arbitrary, because before that, science and art, the art of herbalism is just as much as an art as it is a science. But there seems to be this sort of, as part of the colonial project which was trying to say that there's sort of one truth and there's one knowledge, and everything's emerging from a center that is Europe, so to speak. Feels like the idea of science started to become around the proving of something, and then the idea that once something's proved, it's static, that it doesn't change. So things like the body and nature and pretty much everything, but that are growing and moving, like I was saying, like cities, like slowly, this movement threatens that idea that certainty is static. Like once you've proved it, you're certain of it and it's not going to change. They threaten that idea. And so if something's credibility is based on the fact that it's been proved and it's by science, and then there's things that by their very nature point out that nothing's fixed, then there's this artificial opposition that I think starts to happen. So some of what could be called science becomes about proving things, And then some of what we call art becomes about making and moving and changing things. And then they seem like they're oppositional, but I think they actually speak to each other, are part of the same thing. So I think one of the things that currently to do with dance and this unreasonable divide between science and art is the fact that there's the embodied felt that is really difficult to prove that you feel something because that is also changing. So the kind of embodied element, I think, is the part that as dancers, it's really important to think, how can we engage that in new technology and digital technology so that we don't end up being even further down a road where in order to make something, in order to believe something or for something to be recognizable, that it's not through how you feel or how your body feels, but it's through some kind of separate kind of mental manifestation of an idea. I hope that's making sense. How do we include the embodied and the felt in the digital world, right? The digital world doesn't have to be just about this very number-driven thing of this many people or that many things, that something becomes something because that many people say it. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about AI, and AI is basically just it's using the most of what we're doing to make a logic. If everyone's doing that, then that becomes true, right? So that puts us even more towards that idea of just proving something, because I don't want to say proving actually, so maybe you can cut that part, but that it pushes us more towards the idea of the majority of something. It makes something more substantial as opposed to one individual felt sensation not being as important as the mass. And both are important.
How are you negotiating the two, like the idea of science and art? I feel like specifically creating art with digital technologies, it can be so data driven and focused on the numbers, as you were mentioning. So as an artist, how are you solving that problem while you're making?
Yeah, I feel like the thing that I really am most excited about around the sort of digital world that we're in right now is how important a network is. Like the idea of network is key to our understanding of digital world as we have it. And for me, that is directly a reflection of what I was saying about the kind of lived material world, everything being interconnected as well, so that we live in networks. Like the fascia of our skin, of our body is like a network, and the outside world with trees and plants are networked. And then the internet and many digital things are networked as well. And where people maybe don't have a concept of everything being interrelated in the world outside, people have much more of an idea of what a network is through the digital world. So I feel like that's actually great if we could see everything in networks, so people can be introduced to the idea that we're networked through the digital world and how we engage with that as artists. But that also reflects on introducing that idea being easier to understand in the physical world and in our own bodies. And that also gets back to what I was saying about a kind of more indigenous approach to understanding the world as interconnected and having impact on each other, which is the worldview of many Africanist philosophies and indigenous to North America and South America's philosophies.
Like you said, when you're speaking about networks, it's so easy to know about the digital networks that, like on Facebook or Instagram or even TikTok. So I'll talk about Instagram. Now, so many people have these different channels where they have these chat groups. And so then you're in community and in conversation with people maybe around, let's say, fitness or art or something like a specific topic. And I feel like people are craving this network, this community, this way to be in conversation with people revolving around some kind of common concept or theme. But like you mentioned, it's less common in the physical, like in the real life. And I'll talk about my experience. I recently became a mother, and I find myself in network with my friends who are also experiencing parenthood. And we're networked through the digital space because we don't live in the same city. But I'm having a really hard time finding that network of people physically in real life that I can meet up with in person. And so I feel like what you're offering is something that used to be, as you mentioned, such common practice and so important, but now it seems so obscure and hard to find in the physical practice. And so I really appreciate how you're offering this as a potential solution to find that community and that network.
Yeah, what I feel like is really important is that we don't want to make the same mistakes as, like, we've made mistakes a little bit, like we're at a critical point with the earth as a being where we haven't seen the whole, like the way that things affect each other. The fact that dust in the Sahara affects something on the other side of the Atlantic, and that we haven't seen that. And we've done a little bit of what we're starting to do in what you're describing, that we have networks, but they're networks of all of the same thing, and they don't expand out beyond that space. So I feel like as artists, what's really important is that we populate the digital world in the way that we've tried to populate any other, to be those things that expand and connect and challenge the spaces that we're in, so that we don't end up just reproducing the relationship we have with the network in the physical world or in our own bodies, where we might try and fix something on our finger, but actually it's something to do with our knee, but we never see that as part of the whole. That we rush in to the digital world to try and also have a presence there, where that's what I feel like that's what art does. And maybe that's the beautiful thing between our perception of science and our perception of art, is that our perception of science is towards answers, but our perception of art can be towards questions and more questions and questions that lead to questions. I wanted to say that I'm really interested in mushrooms and the mycelium that connects through, that how that's used by trees to connect to each other and talk to each other. And also they digest things and change things and reincarnate things. And I feel like it's, as an artist, it's nice. I'm imagining how I can be mycelium in the digital network. That's what I feel like artists can be.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work with DancingStrong Movement Lab. And for those who might not be familiar, what is DancingStrong Movement Lab?
DancingStrong Movement Lab is an organization that I co-direct with Helen Kindred. I originally started it as Dancing Strong, and then we collaborated together and moved it into DancingStrong Movement Lab. And it's really just an umbrella organization for different projects that Helen and I do, or we do individually, or any of the artists that work with us do, so that it can umbrella different explorations. And that's why it became Movement Lab. So we have different labs where we're exploring different things towards making pieces and around using dance in different forms. It ends up that the different labs are, I feel like, I guess it's because for me, and I think Helen as well, making a piece of work takes years and years. So it needs like a little container that, this is this piece of work that sort of matures over quite a bit of time before it becomes something necessarily that is shared with an audience, or it's shared with an audience at lots of different stages of its kind of exploration. So Dancing Strong Movement Lab allows for these little containers for explorations.
And what I loved most about Dancing Strong Movement Lab in my research preparing for our conversation is how you have these archivals of the different projects that have been made. So there, as you're talking about kind of the long process that it might take to create the work, it's really cool to go into these different archives and then experience the in process and then see some videos of the final product, if you will, on your website. And I'm wondering, why is that important to you and to Dancing Strong Movement Lab to archive the work on the website and in the digital space in this way?
Yeah, I feel like one reason it's important is because I'm seeing art, like I said, leading to questions rather than leading to products. It's good to see the journey of something. We really are interested in having we've done it on the website, but it would be almost like nice to have a channel where people could just follow the journey of your artistic exploration, to be a part of that rather than just have the end, a moment of end product. It's again like the network. It's like nodes. We have nodes which could feel like products, but then the thing grows a little bit more. And another node, what we're trying to do with the archive is show the overall relationship of all the nodes that have been this expanse that is that exploration. And then I also think it's really important as a Black female artist to archive. I think the archive is missing a lot of voices and individuals and identities. And I think it's really sensible to archive yourself. I'm going to archive myself because it's still going to be a little while, I think, before we figure out how to really be able to see the full range of capacity of different types and identities across humans.
Yeah, I was so attracted to the archive because a lot of the work we're doing here at No Box Dance, and particularly this podcast, is to create the archive of answering the questions we had when we set out to start the show. And part of those questions were revolving around the impact of social media on the dance world. And of course, those questions continue to evolve as we move through time and talk to more and more people such as yourself. But we too think the archival is so important. And when we set out to start our show, we definitely didn't have any answers, but we could see that social media was really changing the landscape of the dance world. We weren't exactly sure how or even why, but it's through these types of conversations that we're hoping over a certain amount of episodes or course of time, we'll be able to go back and maybe analyze what are the common factors, what are the common themes to help kind of articulate maybe further questioning or further, I don't know, maybe even solutions for how dancers are working with social media or digital technology.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And what a great resource. I keep going on about networks, but, or kind of things in relationship with each other. But I think one of the things that helps with all of that is not thinking of time as like forward, behind, or in front of you. So an archive isn't to try and get the archive out of being part of a linear thing of somehow being in relationship with behind you and in front of you, and starting to think of time as being that your future and past maybe are next to you, or they're radiating out. You can't really know your past or your future at a certain amount of radiating out, and you're pretty certain of your past and your future within minutes. I'm pretty certain what just happened and what's just about to happen. that they're equal and then they're radiating out like that. So if we're thinking of with these nodes, so that whole idea of networking or that we're interrelated, it runs quite deeply into how we perceive our lived experience and really keep challenging the linear of things like time.
It really makes me think about perhaps perceiving time as the way you're describing your AR project, as if time is like these different trails that are creating these architectural guides for you to move in and around. And I really appreciate that sentiment.
Yeah, I really think that, like I said, there's this time that's going at the pace of the city, at the pace of the trees. I know it sounds weird, but I'm sure that pigeons are on a whole nother time than humans because of the way they can wait till the very last minute to fly away when you're driving or something. And I always think they must be on some other time thing. They can tell time differently because they just always need but that actually everything is in this, like you said, like this choreography of time that we're in. And also that we have the capacity to dance with that and move in and out of those different spheres of time, to sometimes to be in tree time and sometimes to be in pigeon time.
You are listening to No Box Dance.
Do you think social media is influencing the dance world?
The dance world?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I do. I think social media is influencing everything.
Has it influenced your work as an artist, a scholar, a choreographer?
I think it's difficult to separate it out from I said it's influencing everything. It's influencing everything in a kind of Western world perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's difficult to separate it out from the experience of being in the Western world because it's, most people are familiar with it in some way, even if their familiarity is that they're not very good at it or they don't quite understand it. It's one of those threshold concepts. It's not something that you can be aware of. Like you can't unlearn it. It's a bit like whether you believe in Darwin, what he said, it's still there. Like some people you either believe it or you don't believe it, but you kind of position yourself in terms of it. It's one of those things that we can't not be aware of it. Whatever we think about it, we have a position with it.
Our tagline here at No Box Dance is say no to the box. How do you say no to the box?
The box by saying, I just don't believe in the box.
Flash 4.
We have our Flash 4 segment where we ask all our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash, so as fast as possible. Are you ready?
Yeah.
If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
I've got a book that I'm reading at the moment that's called Let's Be Fungal, Mycelium Teachings and the Arts. I'm really enjoying.
What was the first dance you saw?
I think it might have been like watching musicals on TV, like Fred Astaire and things like that, maybe.
Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world, yes or no?
I'm going to say I don't believe in binaries.
What is your favorite social media platform?
I use Instagram a lot, but I really like YouTube in terms of how there's such a variety of things, from lectures through to just people's artwork or whatever. I think that's a nice resource.
I really am grateful that you came on our show today. In preparing for the interview, I feel like there were so many different kind of avenues that we could go. We could spend a whole episode just talking about one of the books you've written and things like that. But I'm really grateful that we got to talk about technology and how you're perceiving the relationship of technology in terms of networks. I think that imagery is so clear, specifically how you mentioned these nodes as different kind of landmarks connecting all of us through different spaces. Is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with today?
I think that hopefully this all talks around the fact that we do impact each other and we are connected to each other, and the importance of kind of care and kindness being actually the sort of life of how we are. We are all connected to each other. We're really thinking, oh yeah, networks, then that means we have an impact. And even when you feel that you don't, you're still part of things.
It's beautiful. How can our listeners stay connected to you and all the important work that you're doing?
I try to keep my website really up to date with things. There's a little bit about when events are happening, and there's also a part where you can send an email and I can email you back and things. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you again for coming on our show today. I can hear the drums at TW in the background. It's taking me back.
It's we're just starting the end of semester, so I'm going to run in and watch the
showings. I love it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Dance Behind the Screen podcast is produced by Novox Dance, an art service organization that creates, collaborates, and discusses art with artists and the public. Dance Behind the Screen podcast is co-hosted by Azaria Hogans, Raina Mondragon, Martheya Nygaard, and Yejin Choi, with sound designed by Daniel Rosas.
Thanks for taking your time to tune into Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.